Hi, I'm Dr. Bertice Berry, and I need to tell you a story. There are some folks who don't have homes who sleep in the park, the square across from our church. Um, they're asked to move when the tourism and the tours are happening in that same square. They're asked to move. That square happens to be the site where the first slave market also was. So now these folks are descendants of the same kind of poverty, same kind of separation, are being asked to move so tours to talk about it can come through. One day, one of my nieces from church was really upset about it. She happens to be a trans woman. I mention it because she was going out to confront the police officers about it. And I said, "You can't do that. I don't want anything to happen to you. And I don't want the half of this congregation to come crawling out there to make sure you're okay, because we will." And so I said, "There's something we can do." She said, "We got to do something. These are our friends. These are our members. They go to Emmaus House. Emmaus House is our food program where we serve those who are unhoused and those who are hungry 5 days a week. But on that Saturday and on that Sunday, when they're not getting that hearty meal, a meal of maybe fried chicken or beef ribs and a hearty meal. So in the weekends, they come back in the area to get close, to get in line, to get that meal early. Anyway, I said, "Michael, we can do something else." So I decided that we would serve breakfast and have breakfast with them early. So I picked up some things and came into town, and Micah said, "I'm moving a little slow this morning. I'm going to miss you today." I said, "Well, we'll do it again next week anyway." So I got some things and I got out the car, and there was a guy already there, and he said, "I'm so hungry." And I said, "Well, you have one of these donuts, but I'll be back to set things up." And he said, "Okay, Emmaus House?" And I said, "Well, in the square." So I came back out and everybody was gone from the square. They were over at Emmaus House waiting. So I drove everything over. And before I could even get set up or come in, people came to meet me to help me. And they noticed I was wearing my collar. And one guy said, "Good morning, Father. Thank you so much. Your father, you're a priest, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church, which makes me a reverend, but I'm not a priest. And if I were a priest, you could call me mother." And he said, "Okay." I said, "But I'm not a priest. I'm a deacon," which is still an ordained minister in our church, still a reverend. And he said, "Do you go to First Baptist, First African Baptist?" I said, "No, I go to Christ Church." He said, "You're a member of Emmaus House." And I said, "Yeah, I'm a member of Emmaus House," because that's in our parish house where we do the feeding. So some other people came over and they said, "Thank you so much." And one guy looked at the other guy and he said, "Man, you manifested this. We said we needed some breakfast this morning and you manifested it." I said, "Wow." So I went just around, drove around a little bit. There was another group of people. I shared there with them. They said, "Thank you." One woman came and said, "And if you could help us with some suitcases, big suitcases, so we don't get our stuff taken, that would be really great." I said, "Well, I'll check. I'll ask. I'll make an announcement." They said, "Thank you so much. And thank you for this breakfast. We really need it. You have no idea." I said, "I have some." I went back by the church. I pulled in all the donuts, the breakfast, the muffins, the things, everything was gone. Sandwiches. But one guy was coming across, and I guess he had gotten the message lady was probably still asleep. He was moving slowly, and he was really disheveled, and he didn't have any belongings, and he really looked weary. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I really could use something to eat. I heard there was some breakfast." And I said, "Yeah, I took it over to Emmaus House." And I marveled at how fast good news traveled. And I said, "I have a little bit of change on me. Can I share that with you?" He said, "Yes, thank you, please." And I looked and I had $2, and he opened his hands to receive the money like I was taught to do, like I taught my children to do, to respect that currency, to respect it. And he smiled and said, "Thank you." And he saluted me. And when he smiled, I said, "You have such a beautiful smile." And then he saluted me this way. And he said, "Thank you, Angela." I thought maybe he had mistaken me for somebody else. And I said, "Angela?" And he said, "You're Angela Davis." There is always something we can do.